The universe is vast, and its inhabitants are many. But among them, there is one species whose resilience, fury, and sense of justice are unmatched: humanity. What happens when a galactic empire makes the ultimate mistake, one that targets the most innocent of all, their children? This is the story of a once great intergalactic confederation, whose arrogance led them to strike a blow that would cost them everything. Their target was Earth, but they didn't realize that humans don't just fight for territory, resources, or power. When you harm their children, war becomes personal. And humanity's response? It will shake the galaxy to its core. Stay with us to discover how humanity's fierce resolve, unyielding courage, and desire for justice turned the tables on the most powerful empire in the galaxy. This is the story of the day Earth's orphanage was bombed and humanity introduced total war. The universe, vast and indifferent, spun on in its endless dance, uncaring of the lives that inhabited the fragile worlds scattered across the cosmos. But it had never seen anything quite like Earth. Humanity had spent centuries looking up at the stars, wondering if they were truly alone, and now the answer was coming, not in the way they had hoped. On that fateful night, at precisely 3:47 a.m., something happened that would forever alter the course of human history. The Galactic Confederation, a collective of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, had made a grave mistake. A mistake they would never fully understand until it was too late. The Confederation had been watching Earth for some time. Their intelligence reports were clear. The humans were primitive, bipedal, short-lived, and strangely obsessed with collecting pets from other species. Still, they were of no real consequence in the grand scheme of things. Earth was an unremarkable planet in an even more unremarkable corner of the galaxy. Their technology, though advanced compared to some, was still decades behind the Confederation's most primitive colonies. Yet, the humans had refused to join the galactic community. They had rejected offers of trade, laughed at the Grand Arbiter's ceremonial headgear, and most of all, they had refused to bend the knee to the Confederation's rules. The Confederation had tolerated them, like a neighbor who lived at the end of the hall. Strange, distant, and best ignored. That was until the Confederation decided it was time to teach Earth a lesson. They would show them what true power looked like. They would strike hard, quick, and without mercy. The target was a facility in Montana, a remote region on Earth identified by Confederation intelligence as a military training compound. It housed human juveniles being prepared for combat, an easy target for a strike meant to send a message to the human race: comply with galactic law or face the consequences. The strike was perfect, silent, precise, devastating. The kinetic impactor, a weapon of incredible destructive power, tore through the night sky, its trajectory straight and unerring. It struck the heart of the compound. The building collapsed instantly, followed by the secondary structures. The Confederation's observers watched in grim satisfaction as the feed came through. A textbook demonstration of power. They had destroyed a military installation. They had sent a warning. The humans would have no choice but to beg for terms. But then, something unexpected happened. The Confederation waited. They waited for the inevitable diplomatic call to come through. Diplomats would offer apologies, perhaps even reparations. They waited for the humans to panic, to beg for mercy. But nothing came. Not immediately. For 12 long hours, the Confederation sat in silence, the tension building as their sensors scanned for any sign of human response. Nothing. No calls, no communications, just silence. And then it came. A surge of activity, a flood of transmissions. The Confederation's diplomatic AI struggled to keep up, processing the human messages faster than anyone could comprehend. Words like children and orphanage appeared with alarming frequency. The Confederation's analysts stared at the screens, confused. A senior strategist, Cavorn, was the first to understand. His 6 eyes widened in horror. "We've made a mistake," he whispered, the words chilling his spine. The others around him didn't understand at first. "Impossible." Zixtol, the ambassador, clicked in disbelief. "Our intelligence was clear. It was a youth military training facility." But Cavorn's voice trembled as he corrected the error. "It wasn't a military facility," he said, the words almost choking him. "It was an orphanage." The room fell into a stunned silence. An orphanage. A place for children who had lost their parents. A place where the most vulnerable of their species were taken in, cared for, and protected. not soldiers. Children. The words echoed in their minds, crashing over them like a tidal wave. Children, repeated the Supreme Commander of the Confederation's fleet, his voice barely a whisper, as if he couldn't comprehend the horror of what they had done. The feed continued to show the devastation: broken bodies, crumpled buildings, the remains of what should have been a safe haven for Earth's most innocent. "How many casualties?" asked the commander, his voice shaking. Kavorn didn't answer immediately. Instead, he transferred the data, the numbers slowly crawling across the screen. 234 juveniles, Kavorn reported, his voice barely audible, and 17 teen adult caretakers. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the room. The realization of what they had done hit like a slap to the face. They had killed children, the most precious thing to humanity. The Confederation representatives, those who had once considered themselves above the petty concerns of individual species, found themselves gripped by something they had never felt before. Fear, true fear, not of their enemies, but of the unknown. The fear of what they had unleashed. "What have we done?" murmured a diplomat, his voice barely a whisper. In the midst of the growing panic, one of the junior diplomats spoke up, his feathers drooping in distress. "You don't understand. Humans don't think like us. They don't compartmentalize war the way we do. For them, when you threaten their young, war becomes personal." Zixtal, still stunned by the gravity of the situation, demanded to know what the diplomat meant. "Different how?" The diplomat's voice was shaky. "For us, war is about resources, territory, and influence. It's political. But for humans, when you harm their young, when you hurt their children, everything changes. War becomes something else entirely. It becomes a force of vengeance." A cold silence filled the room. "Are you suggesting that they will retaliate?" Zixtal asked, his voice trembling slightly. The diplomat nodded grimly. "I fear they will, and they won't stop until they've made us pay." The Confederation had made a mistake, and humanity was about to show them exactly what happens when you push them too far. The silence that followed the Confederation's strike on the orphanage was the kind of quiet that screamed in the hearts of those who understood what had happened. For 12 hours, the intergalactic network held its breath. The diplomats, strategists, and commanders of the Confederation waited for the inevitable human response. They waited for the angry transmission, the demands for explanations, for apologies. But nothing came. Not a word. The silence was shattered by a sudden surge in human communications, a flood of messages that bombarded the Confederation's diplomatic AI, demanding translation at a pace that overwhelmed their systems. Words like orphanage and children appeared over and over again until the translations began to fill the screens in frantic succession. Every message, every transmission seemed to carry the same horrifying message. The Confederation had miscalculated. And they knew it now. For hours, the AI translated with increasing urgency, but it wasn't until one of the senior Confederation strategists, a towering figure named Kavorn, spoke that they realized the magnitude of their mistake. He stood frozen in place, 6 eyes wide in horror as he connected the dots. "They're not asking for terms." Kavorn's voice cracked, his usual calm demeanor shattered by the weight of the realization. "We've made a grave error. We've killed their children." At first, no one could believe it. Their intelligence had been so certain. The compound in Montana had been designated as a military facility. The humans had been training their young for battle, or so it had seemed. But what the Confederation had failed to understand was the profound value humans placed on their young, on all children, not just their own. A sharp intake of breath filled the room as the full weight of the truth settled over the Confederation's leadership. The room was silent for a long moment, filled only with the hum of the intergalactic communication system. Finally, it was Ambassador Zixtal, his many mouth parts clicking nervously, who broke the silence. "Children," he said, almost to himself. "We've killed their children." The reality of the mistake began to settle in. The Confederation had never before targeted the young. Not in 10,000 years of galactic conquest had they ever made such an error. And now, the response from humanity was building. Across the galaxy, the first of the human fleets, suddenly assembled and on the move, began to accelerate toward Confederation space. The Confederation had long prided itself on its military superiority, but now, in the face of humanity's outrage, They found themselves unprepared for the fury that was about to descend upon them. The Confederation's AI system began to spit out reports at a frantic pace. The humans were moving in ways no one had predicted. The messages they had received were not just angry rants, they were a clear and chilling ultimatum. Humanity does not recognize the concept of limited warfare against those who target children, the message read. Your action has been categorized as an extinction-level offense. You have 14 standard hours to remove all Confederation assets from human space. After that time, no quarter will be given, no terms will be accepted. The response was direct, cold, and unyielding. There was no pleading, no offer for negotiations. The humans weren't asking for peace. They weren't asking for justice. They were demanding retribution. The message had been signed simply, humanity. Zixtal's antennae twitched nervously as he processed the data. Is this some kind of diplomatic posturing? He asked aloud, though even he wasn't sure of the answer. No species would declare total war over a tactical error. One of the junior tacticians, a nervous and excitable Teravian diplomat, was the first to speak up. You still don't understand, he said, his voice shaking. Humans don't think like we do. Their approach to conflict is different. Zixtal turned toward the young diplomat, his patience wearing thin. Different how? They don't compartmentalize their wars, the diplomat said, almost whispering. For them, war isn't just about territory or resources, it's personal. And when you harm their children, they don't just retaliate, they eradicate. A cold shiver passed through the Confederation leadership. The word eradicate hung in the air, like a death sentence awaiting delivery. Kavorn's eyes narrowed. Explain, he demanded. The diplomat's voice quivered. Humans don't just fight to win. They fight to obliterate what harms them. When you target their young, they will stop at nothing to make you pay. And they don't care about the rules we live by. They will go to extremes we've never even considered. In the space station's command center, a chilling realization settled like a weight upon every being present. The Confederation had misread humanity. They had underestimated their wrath, their resolve, their deep, unyielding sense of justice when it came to protecting their children. Impossible, Zixtal muttered to himself. No species can be this relentless. But as the minutes ticked by, more and more reports flooded in. The human fleet, previously scattered across the galaxy, was now moving as one. Thousands of ships, some massive and imposing, others small and agile, formed an unstoppable armada. The Confederation's own intelligence systems began to trace their movements. The human fleet had been assembled almost overnight. Every ship, every weapon, every fighter, all forged from the resources of Earth's nations and corporations, now united under a single overwhelming cause: vengeance. The Confederation's advanced AI analyzed the situation, but its findings were only more disturbing. The humans weren't asking for a diplomatic solution. They weren't offering negotiations. The entire fleet was approaching them with one clear goal: to eradicate the Confederation for the atrocity they had committed. In an emergency meeting, the Confederation's supreme commander, the gelatinous mass of neural tissue who had conquered 17 star systems without losing a single ship, finally spoke. "We've miscalculated," it said, its voice trembling in a way that had never been heard before. "We've underestimated them. They won't stop until we are gone." The room fell into stunned silence as the full weight of humanity's response began to sink in. The Confederation had always been the galaxy's most powerful force. They had never faced a challenge like this, not even from the most hostile species. But humanity? Humanity was different, and now they were about to make the Confederation regret the greatest mistake of their long, proud history. The clock was ticking. And humanity had made it clear no quarter would be given. The hum of the Confederation's command center was deafening, as every officer, strategist, and diplomat tried to process the information flooding in from their monitoring stations. The human fleet was advancing at an unprecedented rate. Even the most sophisticated algorithms the Confederation had developed to track the movements of alien fleets couldn't keep up. The humans, it seemed, were not bound by the same limitations. There was no warning. No sudden burst of acceleration or calculated maneuvering. They simply appeared. Across Confederation space, ships began to detect the arrival of an unknown fleet. Thousands upon thousands of ships, each one smaller than the next, scattered across the galaxy in perfect formation. A cold chill ran down the spines of the Confederation commanders as they watched the fleets approach. These were not just military ships. They were the collective might of a species united in fury. What made matters worse was that the human fleet didn't show any of the usual signs of pre-battle posturing. No demands for surrender, no threats, no boasts. Only silence. A silence filled with intention. The human ships were not the largest in size or the most technologically advanced. They were not the towering dreadnoughts the Confederation had grown accustomed to facing. But they were relentless, and they were everywhere. Every screen in the command center blinked as the human fleet's sensors locked onto the Confederation's defensive perimeter. The first wave had arrived, and there was no turning back. The Confederation's Supreme Commander, whose neural mass had governed countless battles and campaigns, shifted uncomfortably in his nutrient bath. His once unshakable confidence had been replaced by a strange, unsettling feeling, a sense of impending doom. For the first time in his long career, he had no idea how to win. Kavorn, who had been the first to recognize the severity of their mistake, stood stiffly in front of the holographic tactical display. His 6 eyes flickered nervously as the enemy ships came into focus. Despite all the technological superiority the Confederation had accumulated over millennia, it was clear that the humans were not acting as expected. "We've made a serious error," Kavorn muttered, his voice thick with dread. "We thought we understood them, but we never considered this." Zixtol, the diplomat who had initially advocated for the strike on Earth, clicked nervously. "You don't think they're bluffing, do you?" He could barely bring himself to say the words, as if doing so would somehow lessen the reality of what was happening. But Kavorn's reply was grim. "No, they're not bluffing." The first human ship broke through the Confederation's defensive grid with surprising speed. It was a small vessel, barely the size of a cruiser, but its speed was unlike anything the Confederation had anticipated. The Federation's sensors failed to track the ship's movements accurately. As it sliced through the void, it launched a payload of what seemed like distress beacons, broadcasting signals designed to mimic civilian transmissions. And that's when it happened. The Confederation's automated defense protocols, designed to intercept and obliterate any perceived threat, immediately diverted their resources to address the distress signals. The system, designed to protect civilian ships, had become its own worst enemy. The defensive grid, stretched thin by the sudden influx of false alarms, opened a gap. A second human vessel, this time a stealth bomber, slipped through the newly created blind spot. Within moments, it launched a series of precision strikes against the grid's most vulnerable sensors. The grid was now blind, and the human ships poured in like a torrent. "Activate all reserves," the Supreme Commander bellowed, panic beginning to seep into his voice. "We need reinforcements now." But it was too late. By the time the Confederation's reserves had been scrambled, the human fleet had already breached the perimeter. The Confederation's once impenetrable defense system was falling apart faster than they could comprehend. The first wave of human ships had already locked on to their target, the central command hubs where the heart of the Confederation's power resided. The attacking ships moved with a chilling precision. They weren't here to destroy. Not yet. The first wave's purpose was something far worse: to disable and disrupt. The human fleet wasn't interested in tactical victory. It wasn't interested in a show of force. No, they had a much simpler and far more devastating plan. They were going to take out the roots of the Confederation's power, one system at a time, leaving the structure of the Empire in ruins. The first strike came at the main defense hub, an orbital station housing the Confederation's command leadership. The human ships didn't launch a direct assault. Instead, they used their small size and superior maneuverability to stay just out of range of the defense systems. Their tactics were not about firepower. They were about precision and timing. They knew exactly when and where to strike. A few minutes later, the orbital station, formerly the command center of the entire Confederation, was a shadow of its former self. Communication channels went dark. No one could understand what had happened. It was like the heart of the Confederation had simply stopped beating. Meanwhile, the human fleet didn't slow down. With each passing moment, their control over the battlefield grew. The Confederation, usually so sure of its invincibility, was floundering. Their superior numbers, their technological might, all meaningless against the fury of humanity's wrath. "We can't win," the Supreme Commander finally whispered, his voice carrying the heavy weight of defeat. "This isn't a war anymore. It's an execution." But even as they spoke, the human ships, now in complete control of the Confederation's defensive grid, began to approach their next target, the Confederation archives. These archives contained the entirety of the Confederation's history, their greatest accomplishments, their technologies, their scientific breakthroughs, all the knowledge that had been accumulated over the course of thousands of years. The humans weren't here to destroy it. No, they were here to steal it. "We're not here to conquer," a voice from the human fleet spoke over the intergalactic communication channels, breaking through the static. "We're here to make sure you never forget what you've done, and we will remember." The Confederation's leaders, once so confident in their technological superiority, now found themselves staring into the abyss. They had never considered this, a race that didn't follow the rules of war, a species that would rise up with every ounce of strength to avenge the loss of their most vulnerable. And as the human ships continued their march across the galaxy, the Confederation realized that the real war had only just begun. The Confederation's command center was now a hive of frantic activity. The once sterile walls of the vast control room buzzed with alarms and the harsh hum of malfunctioning consoles. The shock of humanity's unexpected power was settling into something far more dangerous: dread. The Confederation, for the first time in millennia, was being made to feel vulnerable, and the fear was palpable in every corner of the room. The Supreme Commander floated in his nutrient bath, his gelatinous form undulating as if it were struggling to maintain its composure. His eyes, if they could be called eyes, blinked sporadically as he processed the situation, trying to calculate a way out. But the truth had already settled in. There was no way out. Not this time. Every defensive measure they had designed, every piece of technology they had perfected over millennia, had crumbled in the face of humanity's wrath. The Confederation's fleet, once a symbol of invincibility, had been decimated in a matter of hours. Their flagship was gone. Their orbital defense grid, the pride of their military engineers, had fallen in mere minutes. The Confederation had become nothing more than a broken shell, its power a fleeting memory. In the midst of all this chaos, Kavorn stood rigid, his 6 eyes fixed on the holographic display before him. His usual sense of control had been replaced with a gnawing anxiety. "It's not just the military they've destroyed," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "They've dismantled our very identity. Every data archive, every record of our civilization, gone. They've erased everything we built." Zixtal, still in shock, paced back and forth. His antennae twitched nervously as he tried to form a coherent thought. "They've already breached our most secure facilities, our history, our legacy. We're losing everything. It's over." Kavorn's voice cut through the air, sharp and precise, though it was laced with a new sense of desperation. "We underestimated them. We thought that by striking their military we would break their spirit, but we forgot one crucial thing." His eyes locked onto Zixtal, his voice barely above a whisper. "They care about nothing more than their children." Zixtal froze. The weight of those words hit him like a physical blow. He had made the fatal mistake of seeing humanity as a fragmented, primitive species, one easily divided by politics and power. But now, as he witnessed their determination to destroy everything the Confederation had ever known, he understood. To them, this wasn't a war for territory or resources. This was something far more primal. This was revenge. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, the human fleet continued its relentless advance, undeterred by the Confederation's efforts to regroup. It was not the overwhelming firepower of their ships that terrified the Confederation. It was the strategy, the complete disregard for conventional warfare. Humanity's tactics were unfathomable, impossible to predict. They were using their own technology against them, infiltrating their systems and sabotaging their most secure locations with deadly precision. A transmission came through the command center. It was an encrypted communication from the human fleet, but the message was far from what the Confederation had expected. Instead of the usual demands or threats, the screen flickered to life with the image of a human representative, calm, composed, and eerily pleased. "Good afternoon, Confederation," the human began, his voice cold and unyielding. "I trust you've had time to reflect on the decisions you made." The image of the human flashed briefly with a chilling smile. You see, that's the thing about humans. We don't forget and we don't forgive, especially when it comes to our children. The Supreme Commander's neural mass rippled in confusion. "What is this? Why are you speaking to us as if we've already lost?" "Oh, you have," the human replied, his voice echoing throughout the command room. "You lost the moment you targeted our young, and now there's no turning back. Your civilization, as you knew it, is gone. You can't stop us now." The human's words cut deep. The very existence of the Confederation was now in question. They had built an empire based on conquest, but humanity had just shown them how fragile that empire really was. In a matter of days, their entire foundation had crumbled. "Why are you doing this?" Zixtal demanded, his voice breaking under the strain of the situation. "We never intended to harm your young. It was a mistake, an unfortunate miscalculation." The human representative's expression darkened. "Mistake? You call it a mistake? You deliberately targeted our most vulnerable. Children. That's not a mistake, that's an act of war, and you will pay for it." The human paused for a moment, letting the words hang in the air like a heavy weight. "But there's still a chance for you, a chance to make things right. Surrender the individuals responsible for this atrocity. All of them. From the intelligence analysts who gave the orders to the commanders who authorized it, we will not tolerate the guilty surviving." Zixtal's mouth parts clicked nervously. "What happens if we don't comply?" The human's smile never wavered. "Then we won't just defeat you. We will erase you. Every record of your existence. Every trace of your civilization. You will be nothing but a footnote in history. And that's the kindest option." As the transmission ended, a deep silence fell over the Confederation's command center. It was the silence of realization, of inevitability. The Confederation, once the most powerful force in the galaxy, now stood on the brink of total annihilation. There was no diplomacy left to be had. The human fleet wasn't interested in negotiating or peace. They had a singular goal now: to make the Confederation pay. The Supreme Commander's mind raced. "We can't give them what they want. We can't surrender the guilty. If we do, it will be seen as a weakness. We'll be nothing more than a puppet government." Kavorn shook his head. "What's left of our government? What's left of our military? The human fleet has already shown us how powerless we are. You think they'll stop after we give them the list of guilty parties? No, they won't stop. They'll destroy us regardless." Zixtal's voice was trembling now. "Then what do we do?" The human fleet was already upon them. The first wave of ships had breached the outer perimeter of their defenses. The Confederation had only one option left: fight back. But this time, there was no confidence in their resolve. There was no certainty in their tactics. They weren't going to fight for victory. They were going to fight for survival. And they knew it wouldn't be enough. The weight of defeat hung heavy in the air, pressing down on every living being in the Confederation's command center. For the first time in centuries, the once mighty leaders of the galaxy's greatest empire found themselves without answers. The human fleet, now a seemingly unstoppable force, had breached their last line of defense and was pushing deeper into their territory, erasing everything in their path. In the absence of their usual power and precision, the Confederation had resorted to a desperate hope, the idea that humanity, despite its fury, would pause to negotiate. But that hope had quickly dissolved when the human representative, with chilling calm, made it clear that negotiation was no longer an option. There was only one thing left for the Confederation to do: survive. Yet survival was no longer an option with any real certainty. "Where is the strength we once had?" the Supreme Commander murmured, his voice trembling. The once imposing form of the neural mass now seemed fragile, like the last ember of a dying fire. Our defense systems were the pinnacle of galactic engineering. How could we fall to them? Kavorn's 6 eyes focused on the holographic tactical display, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and fear. His mind raced through strategies, but every one of them felt futile. The human fleet was overwhelming. Their tactics were too unconventional, too unpredictable. The Confederation had always believed that strength came from firepower, from sheer numbers. from the calculated manipulation of technology. They had never considered the force of humanity's resolve. The emotional drive to protect their young was a weapon the Confederation had underestimated, and now they were paying the price. "Their fleet is everywhere," Zixtol said, his voice small. "They've outpaced us in every sense. They've dismantled our defenses, our military. What do we have left? What's the point of resistance?" The room fell into a tense silence, the sense of hopelessness settling over the leaders like a heavy fog. The Confederation's legacy, their glorious reign, their unmatched technology, their unparalleled military power was fading fast. It was being replaced by the undeniable fact they were powerless. But as the feeling of defeat lingered, something within Kavorn snapped. His eyes hardened and his voice grew sharp, cutting through the despair that filled the room. "No," he said firmly, "we will not surrender. We cannot." Zixtol and the others looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" Zixtol asked. "We can't fight back. We've lost everything." Kavorn's gaze hardened. "I understand that, but we have one last weapon, one last thing we can do." "Survive?" asked the Supreme Commander, his voice dripping with disbelief. "How?" Kavorn stepped toward the central console, his movements deliberate. "We might be losing the war, but the human fleet hasn't crushed us yet. They've made their demands, they've shown us their power, but they haven't wiped us off the map. Not completely." Zixtol stepped forward, trying to follow Kavorn's reasoning. "What are you suggesting?" "Make them understand," Kavorn replied, his voice cold and determined. "We won't be destroyed like this. The Confederation will not go down begging for mercy. We'll show them that even in the face of defeat, we have something they'll never understand, our own fight for survival. We'll make them regret their choices." The room fell quiet once more, but this time, the silence was filled with something else, a glimmer of defiance. Meanwhile, the human fleet continued its relentless advance. Every human ship was a testament to the fury of a species willing to go to any length to protect what they loved. They didn't care about rules. They didn't care about negotiations. They didn't care about the sanctity of galactic law. They cared about justice, and they were going to ensure that it was served. But the Confederation wasn't finished. Not yet. Kavorn was right. They had lost most of their power. Their fleet had been decimated. Their technology had been outpaced. But there was one thing left in their favor: the will to survive. As the Confederation scrambled to regroup, they turned their attention to their final hope, their vast network of covert operations, secret installations, hidden military assets, resources that hadn't been tapped into in generations, but still existed in the deepest corners of their empire. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The Confederation began to mobilize the remnants of their forces. The last of their loyalist fleets were activated, hidden deep within their star systems. Quietly, they began to prepare for their final stand. But even as they did, they couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a war. It was personal. As the human fleet continued to advance toward the heart of the Confederation, they were already planning their next move. They would not simply annihilate the Confederation. They were going to leave a legacy, a message. The galactic community would know that humanity was not to be underestimated. The Confederation had made a fatal mistake by attacking the most sacred thing to humans, and now they would pay. The message was clear. No one hurts their children. And as the first of the Confederation's remaining ships powered up, it became apparent to everyone, humanity wasn't going to stop until they had gotten the justice they were due. The hum of the Confederation's emergency systems became deafening. Alarms blared through the corridors of their last remaining strongholds, a sound that seemed to echo across the emptiness of space itself. The once vibrant hub of galactic diplomacy and military might was now nothing more than a crumbling relic of a civilization that had overestimated its invincibility. The human fleet had already broken through their defenses, bypassing the once unshakable walls of the Confederation like a child knocking over a tower of blocks. Every attempt to regroup, to mount a defense, had failed. The Confederation's forces, now scattered and disorganized, were like a flock of wounded birds, desperate and lost. No longer could they rely on their superior technology, their massive ships, or their centuries of domination. The humans, relentless and determined, had shown them that the true measure of power was not in might, but in the will to fight. And humanity's will to fight was unmatched. Inside the command center of the Confederation's last stronghold, the few remaining leaders gathered in a makeshift war room, their faces tense with frustration. The mood was grim. The galaxy was shifting, and the once proud Confederation was on the verge of complete collapse. The Supreme Commander, who had once floated confidently in his nutrient bath, now seemed small and insignificant. His form rippled with anxiety. "We are out of time," he said, his voice weak as he turned to the others. "Our fleet has been scattered, our technology has been sabotaged. The humans, they're coming for us." The words were like a death sentence. The Confederation had always prided itself on its ability to adapt, to overcome any obstacle with sheer force of will. But this was different. The humans weren't interested in rules or regulations. They weren't playing by the same script the Confederation had followed for millennia. And now, their response, swift, powerful, and unrelenting, had shattered the very core of the Confederation's beliefs. Kavorn, still as cold and calculating as ever, stepped forward. His 6 eyes glinted with a new kind of determination. "We have only one chance left," he said, his voice low but firm. "We have to force a surrender. We have to make them understand that we are not broken yet." Zixtal, who had once been one of the Confederation's most influential diplomats, shook his head. "There's no negotiating with them. They've made it clear they want justice for what we've done. We killed their children. We're beyond diplomacy now." But Kavorn wasn't ready to give up. "We still have influence. We still have power. It's not over yet." He paced back and forth, his thoughts racing. "The humans are angry, yes, but they're also rational. If we offer them a way out, if we show them that we're willing to change, there may still be a way to survive." Zixtal's voice was tinged with bitterness. "You really think they'll accept an offer of peace after what we've done? After we killed their children? They won't stop until we're destroyed." But Kavorn's resolve was unshakable. "Then we die with honor," he muttered, a strange glint in his eye. "But we will fight." Outside the command center, the echoes of the approaching human fleet grew louder. Each passing minute brought them closer to the heart of the Confederation's remaining strongholds. In the distance, the first waves of human ships could be seen closing in. But it wasn't just their ships that struck fear into the hearts of the Confederation. It was the silence that accompanied them. No broadcasts, no threats, no demands, just the sound of engines humming and the cold, unyielding march of their fleet. The human approach was calculated, strategic, cold. They weren't here to waste time with diplomacy. They had already given the Confederation an ultimatum. Now, it was time to enforce it. The Confederation's last remaining military forces scrambled to deploy what little they had left, but their resources were stretched thin, and the human fleet had already anticipated their movements. The Confederation was being outplayed at every turn. "They're not even trying to negotiate anymore," Zixtal muttered, his voice strained. "We've lost. The humans will destroy us." Kavorn, ever the strategist, turned to face him. "We'll see about that." He tapped a series of commands into the console, activating the hidden fleet, the remnants of the Confederation's secret reserve forces. These ships, though small and scattered, still held the potential to strike a crippling blow if deployed strategically. It was the last play they had left, but even as Kavorn spoke, he knew the truth. The humans were already one step ahead. They had anticipated this move. They were already within range of the Confederation's most vital systems, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. As the human fleet approached, they broadcast one final message to the Confederation's leadership. "This is the final warning. Surrender now, and we will grant you mercy. Resist, and we will erase you. There will be no negotiation, no more talks." The Supreme Commander's voice trembled as he listened to the transmission. The words were final. There would be no second chances. "We have no choice," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. But Kavorn, in his final act of defiance, looked out at the advancing human fleet. "No, we still have our will to fight. We will never kneel. We may be beaten, but we will not die on our knees." With that, the last remnants of the Confederation's forces were deployed, though they were woefully inadequate against the sheer scale of humanity's might. As they prepared for the inevitable, they could only hope that somehow, somewhere within their dying empire, a spark of resistance would ignite. But the Confederation had forgotten one simple truth about humans. When they say they'll fight until the end, they mean it. The first of the human ships breached the final defensive perimeter, and the Confederation, as it had known itself, ceased to exist. The moment the first wave of human ships breached the final defensive perimeter, the Confederation's heart seemed to stop beating. The colossal fleet of human warships, now numbering in the thousands, swept through the void with terrifying efficiency. Every ship, whether it was a fighter or a massive dreadnought, bore the same image, a small stuffed teddy bear painted on its hull. To the eyes of the Confederation's remaining forces, it was an image that was both innocent and terrifying. The teddy bear, something so simple, so childlike, had become the symbol of their destruction. The battle was upon them, but it was not like any battle the Confederation had fought before. There was no pomp or circumstance, no space battles filled with grand maneuvers and calculated strikes, no dramatic speeches or ultimatums. The humans came, not with rhetoric or posturing, but with pure fury. Their ships cut through the Confederate defenses as if they were made of paper, bypassing shields, disabling weapons, and rendering entire fleets useless in moments. And all the while, their advance was quiet. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional transmission, a cold, final statement of intent. The Confederation's few remaining command officers, isolated in their underground bunkers, could only watch as their empire fell apart in real time. Their once impenetrable fortress was nothing but a smoldering wreck. Where did we go wrong? Zixtal asked aloud, though he already knew the answer. It had been their arrogance, their belief that no one could stand against them. They had been wrong. They had miscalculated humanity in the most fundamental way. And now, it was too late to stop it. The last remnants of their fleet were scattered, reduced to isolated ships that had no hope of winning. They could barely coordinate their defense as humanity's advance continued without hesitation. It was like watching a river break its banks, sweeping everything in its path. There was no strategy left. The Confederation wasn't fighting to win anymore. They were fighting for survival, and even that seemed impossible. In the depths of the remaining Confederate strongholds, Kavorn sat still, his eyes locked onto the holographic displays, his mind racing for some form of salvation. He had no illusions now. There was no escape from what was coming. The human fleet was too close, too many. They had already destroyed the Confederation's ability to fight back. But there was something else, something Kavorn had not yet considered in his desperation. The humans had made their demands clear. They wanted justice. And that, Kavorn realized, was where the Confederation's final, tragic mistake lay. In all their years of conquest, they had never understood the one thing that made humans so terrifying. Humans were not like the other species in the galaxy. The Confederation's enemies had always been about domination, taking resources, land, influence. Even their most violent conflicts had been about territory or political control. But humanity had something deeper. They had values, ideals, things that made them willing to sacrifice everything, even their own lives, just to protect what mattered most. And now the Confederation had attacked the one thing they could not touch, their children. There was no going back. And yet, even as Kavorn stood in the broken remains of his empire, a final, almost absurd thought flickered through his mind. Had humanity already won? The answer came when the final human ship appeared in the Confederate system. It wasn't a warship. It wasn't a fighter. It was a diplomatic vessel, small and inconspicuous. Yet it carried a weight that none of the Confederation's finest ships could match. This was not a show of force. It was a statement. The ship wasn't here to conquer. It wasn't here to engage in a final battle. It was here to finish the job. The human representative aboard the vessel, one who had led the charge against the Confederation, appeared on the holographic screen. The scene around him was tranquil, too tranquil, given the chaos just beyond. But it was that calmness that struck the final blow to the Confederation's resolve. There was no anger in his face, no rage, just quiet determination. "You've lost," the human said simply. "Your civilization as you knew it is finished. The war is over." Kavorn's heart sank. He knew the human's words were not a threat. They weren't a boast. They were the truth. The Confederation's empire, its history, its legacy, all gone. The human fleet had wiped them out in a way no other species ever had. They had taken everything, and they had done it with no more than a promise of retribution. "We gave you every chance to make things right," the human continued. We gave you the option of peace, and instead, you chose to destroy what mattered most to us. He paused, his eyes fixed on the hologram. But now, we are finished with you. The human's voice softened, and there was a strange sense of finality in it. The Confederation will no longer exist, but we, the people of Earth, will not forget what you did. We will remember this day as the day our children were avenged, and the galaxy will remember too. Let that be your legacy. With a simple flick of his hand, the transmission ended, and as the final human fleet continued to march toward the Confederation's last stronghold, Kavorn couldn't help but think, what was left for them now? The Confederation's leadership had failed. Their empire was gone. The people who had once stood at the pinnacle of galactic power were now nothing more than a footnote in the history of a species that had learned the hardest lesson of all. That lesson was simple: never threaten the children of humanity. As the last remnants of the Confederation's military were wiped out, the human fleet moved forward with purpose, dismantling the political structure of the once proud empire. Every system, every world that had once been part of the Confederation was now free to decide its own fate. The Montana Accord, a simple but profound set of principles, was established. The key tenet was clear: no more harm to children. Not a single world in the galaxy would ever dare to forget what had happened. The Confederation, in its final moments, had given the galaxy something it would never forget, a reminder of just how far humanity would go to protect those they loved. The last remnants of the Confederation's might crumbled under the weight of humanity's resolve, leaving behind only the ruins of a once great empire. As the final Confederate stronghold fell, the silence that followed was as deafening as the chaos of battle had been. But it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of total annihilation. The Confederation, as it had existed for thousands of years, was no more. The human fleet, now fully in control, stood as a testament to the raw power and indomitable will of a species driven by the one force that no empire had ever truly understood: love. Love for their children. The Confederation had learned that lesson too late, but the galaxy would remember it forever. In the wake of the destruction, the leaders of the human fleet gathered aboard the flagship, their faces grim but determined. The war was over. The Confederation had fallen. But the work that lay ahead was not about victory. It was about justice. It was about rebuilding what had been lost and ensuring that such a tragedy would never happen again. The Montana Accord, forged in the ashes of the Confederation, became the cornerstone of a new era. Its terms were simple, yet profound. Never again would any civilization target the children of another species. The protection of the young was now an absolute, inviolate law, across the galaxy, on every world, in every system. And any entity, no matter how powerful, that dared to break this law would face the combined might of humanity and its allies. But for those who had suffered the most, for the humans who had lost their children in the attack on the orphanage, there was no peace to be found in the mere victory. The victory had been hard-earned, born of grief, rage, and an unrelenting drive to protect what mattered most. Now there would be remembrance. The first act of the new human-led intergalactic alliance was a simple, quiet one. On Earth, at the site of the destroyed orphanage, the remains of the fallen were carefully laid to rest, their graves marked by simple headstones, engraved with names that would never be forgotten. Around the graves, a new structure was rising, a memorial, not just for the children who had died, but for the fallen Confederation as well. A symbol of what happens when lines are crossed and when the most vulnerable are targeted. The memorial was not just a monument to loss. It was a testament to the strength of the human spirit, to the belief that justice could still be achieved even after the darkest of days. And above the entrance of the memorial, in multiple languages, including the now extinct script of the Confederation, the plaque read, "Here we remember the children who died and the civilization that died with them. May both serve as reminders that the universe has lines that must never be crossed." The galaxy, once dominated by the Confederation's ruthless expansion, now found itself at a crossroads. A new power had emerged, not to conquer, but to protect. Humanity, having shown the galaxy the depths of its fury, now turned its gaze forward to the future. The remnants of the Confederation, now stripped of their power, were forced to confront the consequences of their actions. But even as the human fleet continued its peaceful march, offering technology, protection, and trade to any world willing to join the new intergalactic alliance, they made one thing clear: the Montana Accord would be upheld at all costs. It wasn't just a law, it was the new order. And no one, no matter how advanced or powerful, would be allowed to threaten the future of the children. For the Confederation's former leaders, the punishment was swift and unexpected. They were not executed, as many had feared. Instead, they were sentenced to rebuild what they had destroyed. The very people who had once held the reins of power were now tasked with the most humbling of duties: rebuilding the orphanage, the very place where their empire had committed its most unforgivable atrocity. It was a kind of poetic justice, though no one could say it was easy. The former leaders worked alongside the humans who had suffered most from the bombing, the very parents who had lost their children. They labored not as conquerors, but as caretakers, rebuilding what had been lost, brick by brick, stone by stone. There were no grand speeches, no formal declarations, just the quiet, laborious act of redemption. The legacy of the Confederation was no longer a symbol of fear or power. It was now a lesson in humility, in justice, and in the power of love. As the memorial took shape and the new orphanage rose from the ashes, the Confederation's history began to fade into the background. Their records, once stored in the most secure facilities across the galaxy, were erased, not destroyed, but preserved as a reminder, a testament to their failure. The human fleet, now a symbol of peace, moved forward, offering its guidance to the worlds that sought it. And in time, the once mighty Confederation became nothing more than a footnote in galactic history. The final transmission from the human fleet was simple, clear, and final: never again. And as the human ships departed from the wreckage of the Confederation, heading toward a future filled with possibilities and promises, the galaxy understood. They understood that when humanity spoke of justice, it was not just a word, it was a vow. The universe would never forget the lesson humanity had taught it. Thank you for watching this incredible journey of resilience, justice, and retribution. The fall of the Confederation is a powerful reminder that no matter how vast or powerful an empire may seem, humanity's will to protect what it loves can never be underestimated. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment telling us what you thought. Your support means the world to us, and we're always eager to hear your feedback. Join us for more epic tales of humanity's greatest battles and triumphs. We can't wait to bring you more thrilling stories right here on Alien Watchers. Until next time, keep watching, because the stars are just the beginning.